How's everyone doing? Thumbs up. Well, welcome to another week of Recovery Rises. Last session, I actually went back and viewed the video. It was a lot of information. So I just want to reconnect to some of that. The hallmark of our session last time was introducing the 5 deadly horsemen of the apocalypse as communication dynamics that are really, really toxic. And the reason that I brought those in now is because one of the things that we know for sure, I'm just gonna mute everyone for background noise. Let's see here. Oh, one of the things that we know for sure is that when we are living through a lot of overwhelm, anxiety, and uncertainty, all of that stress and tension can pour over and into our relationships, especially those that we really rely on for support. And when that happens, we can find ourselves engaging in or being the recipient of communication patterns and behaviors that are really, really toxic. And in order to protect our own sobriety, it's really important to be mindful not only of the way that we're communicating with others, but also to be very, very protective about the ways that others are communicating with us. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse tend to be present in family dynamics, relational dynamics where addiction is present or where addiction has been an issue. And so many of these dynamics might be really familiar to you. I'm going to bring the screen back up, the slides back up, just to sort of provide an overview of these dynamics. And last time I didn't have a chance to really sort of talk with you about, let me just get the slideshow going here. I didn't have an opportunity to talk with you about what is hopeful and positive about these dynamics. And that's where we're going to spend our time and attention today. So if you remember, relational dynamics, the 4 deadly horsemen of the apocalypse, represent 4 types of dynamics that are really toxic. They come from the work of John Gottman and the Gottman Institute. They are an invaluable model whenever you're assessing the health and well-being of any of your relationships. They make perfect sense to us. Criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. They make perfect sense why these would be toxic, but we really took a deep dive into each one last time. But what I want to remind you of here is that these ways of communicating can manifest themselves not just in what you say verbally, but more important, in how you think about another person or how others are thinking about you. I'm sure you've all had the experience of knowing that someone was holding thoughts of you that were highly critical, very defensive, contemptuous, or that they were stonewalling. We see these dynamics in other people's behaviors towards us. We see them a lot in their nonverbal communication, what their body language is speaking. And I would add here in their paraverbal communication. And paraverbal communication refers to how we say something, our tone, our rate of speech, our volume. Those things can be carriers of criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So when we talk about criticism, which is actually a very normal and natural part of our communication, especially in our close relationships, we're talking about this getting toxic when it's very pervasive. And the way that it tends to start is this very, very slow picking at another person or feeling as if we've been picked at. criticism over time is very, very erosive to our well-being. If we have been the subject of constant or chronic criticism, it can seriously damage self-esteem. And when it occurs during our childhood as part of a larger family dynamic, it can have implications that reach well into our adult lives. And if we don't proactively do something to sort of undo the damage of criticism, we really limit our possibilities. And it sort of, it stays with us. And another outcome of criticism being sort of a chronic communication pattern that you may have been subjected to is that you might find that you yourself have become critical. We see this a lot in children who grew up in homes where they were the receiver of a lot of criticism, then going on to be parents who are really critical of their own children. So when you think about criticism, you want to think about it as a picking away at another person, and that it's really erosive. Defensiveness makes perfect sense if we live in an environment where there's criticism going on. I can't help but become very defensive if I'm being criticized. So once defensiveness enters, if it's not nipped in the bud and it just becomes part of the way that two people or a family are interacting with each other, it really lays the groundwork. It kind of opens up the pathway for the third horseman to arrive, which is contempt. And you see that on the screen. Contempt is in bold for a reason. And I mentioned last time that contempt is really, really harsh. There are no words really to describe how contempt feels. And you can think about it in two ways. Think about moments in your own life where you actually felt contempt for another person. It's a very, very heavy kind of emotion. And reversing that, think about those moments when you were the recipient of another person's contempt. Contempt is also really harmful and damaging if we've had to witness it. So, for example, if we grew up in a home where families treated each other in a contemptuous way, or if we grew up with parents where that was part of their dynamic, it's like living in an atmosphere where you are marinating in a toxic, virus-like, cancerous-like dynamic. It stays with us. It doesn't feel good to feel contempt toward another person, and it certainly doesn't feel good to be the receiver of it. We cannot live for very long with these three horsemen present, which makes perfect sense why then we might stonewall. And when I stonewall, I just cut everybody out. I build a wall around myself. I may go on to be very pleasant to the same people who are behaving in these ways, but I almost become impenetrable. I don't want anything to penetrate. It is a way of how I protect myself. So what's damaging about stonewalling is that it's very, very difficult to have a long-term, fulfilling, endearing, trusting, deep relationship with another person when we are so defended, when I have armored up and walled off. So these are the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The apocalypse is a pretty rough term to use, but what it really represents is over time and in a chronic fashion, if these are present, the relationship will begin to disintegrate, dismantle, explode. It can feel really apocalyptic. It's a devastation of sorts. So I want to pause here and just open this up for what you think about these dynamics before we go into what's hopeful. So you can unmute yourselves And again, I introduce these because these can be really profoundly present in situations where there's just a lot of stress. We can find ourselves naturally acting in these ways. We've all done this. We've all been the receivers of it. It's toxic and really harmful and very threatening to sobriety when it's chronic. So what do you think? Anyone? So I mentioned the Gottman Institute and the research that they've done on families, and a lot of their research is focused on marriage, long-term committed relationships, whether it culminates in marriage or not. But if there's a long-term commitment, and I may have mentioned last time that if they observe over a period of just a couple of hours the dynamic between two people, they can predict with alarming accuracy whether or not this couple will stay together or not, simply by listening to tone, listening to word choice, watching body language. And they've come up with what's called the 5-to-1 ratio. And the 5-to-1 ratio, and this is really a tidbit of information that that is proven, that if your relationship is sort of heading in the direction of breaking up, separation, divorce, and this also is applicable to a friendship, or perhaps the severing or suspending, separating from a family tie. The 5-to-1 ratio is that for every act of criticism, every moment of contempt, every moment of defensiveness, they refer to them as swipes. Every time I swipe at another person, it takes 5 acts, 5 gestures of positive communication to override the damaging impact of that one swipe. So if we can keep that in mind, for every critical moment, if I'm really critical of someone in a way that's really nasty and dysfunctional, or that comes out of my own stress level that's just unmanaged, every moment that I swipe at someone, every moment where I speak in a way that's contemptuous, in order to eradicate the impact of that, I have to provide 5 positive communication moments. So imagine if that's true for every one moment of criticism or swiping, there has to be 5 moments of positive communication. Imagine what happens if the deadly horsemen are part of, on an ongoing basis, the way that you communicate with each other. It's severely, I like to think about it as draining the relational, the emotional bank account. Because for every positive communication, and we're going to get to that next, it's like I'm filling the bank account with the good. But one negative, I need 5 positives to make up for it. That is a really profound equation. So think about that. And they write a lot about that. And they show how powerful it is and how it works in their research. So what's the hope? What is the hope? Let's go back to these slides. All right. How do we combat, or the term that they use, what are the antidotes to the four horsemen. Again, none of these will surprise you, but I think it's worth taking a look at these and then just asking yourself, how often do I engage in the sorts of communication that are showing up here on the right side of the screen? So what is the antidote to criticism? Praise, affirmation, gratitude. How often do you praise the people in your life? Oftentimes, we grant praise when a child or a partner or a family member or a colleague seems to go above and beyond what our expectations are, or we grant praise for the big things. What about the little things? Sometimes praise, affirmation, and expressions of appreciation and gratitude have to be proactively, I don't want to use the forced, proactively practiced, because we might be so out of practice. Is there one thing today that you can praise your partner for, praise your child for, praise a colleague or friend for? I really appreciate that you have checked in on me almost every day since we've been housebound. I am really impressed with all of the stress and tension that's going on in this household. I was really impressed when I was watching you help our son do his math homework last night, because that's not easy. Praise can be expressed not just in the words that we speak, but just even in our body language. You know, the act of reaching out for someone's hand, the act of placing our hands on someone's shoulders, the act of just walking up to people in our life and giving them a warm embrace. So praise, affirmation is, I want to remind you about all of the ways in which you're really significant. Affirmation, I want you to know that you're not invisible to me, even though I'm not really present a lot as of late. Or I may have been remiss in acknowledging that you're here, and I'm really appreciative of that. And then finally, gratitude. These are the things that I'm grateful for. Can you sprinkle these into your dynamic in a way that's really subtle, but when it happens on a regular basis, you begin to create almost an insurance policy against being critical. So praise, affirmation, and gratitude are communication dynamics, ways of communicating that are antidotes to criticism. And even if criticism is a pervasive part of a relational dynamic, you can begin immediately using praise, affirmation, and gratitude to begin to correct the kind of damage that criticism has created. Defensiveness, what's the antidote? Openness and deciding that I'm going to remain committed to our connection no matter what. Unless the connection is really abusive and very detrimental to our well-being, I'm not giving up. Openness is the most important antidote. I think I may have mentioned that defensiveness impacts us posturally. So we might not even be aware that we've become defensive, but the body is telling us, is always giving us messages about our degree of openness and our degree of defense. Whenever you begin to feel sort of a rounding of the spine and a closing in of the body, and that sort of constriction and tightness at the front of the body, the body is telling you, I have come into a defensive stance. Whenever I bring my hands across my chest, unless I'm cold, whenever I bring my hands across my chest in a dynamic and kind of sit back as opposed to lean in, I have become defensive. And there's a reason for that. Part of the reason that we are sort of caving into ourselves, protecting the front of the body, is we are protecting what is most vital to us. We are protecting the heart. We are protecting the lungs. We are protecting all of the organs right here at the center of the body. And we're actually protecting the genital region of the body. It's sort of like all the things that represent life. This gives you a sense of how strong defensiveness is when we go into this strong need to protect ourselves. There is a somatic response that begins to happen, a bodily response. We don't see individuals going into defensiveness with their arms wide open, or with this big expansion in the heart and the chest. We don't. Try to be defended or be in a defensive moment and stay really, really open. So how do we retrain the body if we know I really, really tend to be defensive or in a defended state when I'm with this person? And I want to stop that because I would like to be close again, or maybe see if we can become close in a really authentic way. Part of my own healing is going to involve, can I open up all of the places that I have contracted? When we are defensive, again, ongoingly and in a chronic fashion, it affects our cardiovascular health. It affects our capacity to breathe. It affects how well we function in terms of our liver, gallbladder, pancreas, spleen, the functioning of the colon, those internal organs that reside at our center. It can impact the functioning of the reproductive organs and glands. Just think about this, the profound nature of being in defensive mode, which tends to be fight, flight, freeze. Over time, there are very real, very detrimental impact to our physical health and well-being. So I want to guide you through an exercise. Some of you have done this with me before, but I want to guide you through a brief exercise that will put you into a position of openness. This is an opportunity for you to feel in your body what it means to feel the tension of defensiveness, and in contrast, to feel the expansiveness of openness, or the non-defended heart. If you want to, you can feel free to turn your cameras off. If you have a pen or anything you're writing with, just drop it. Because the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you if you can bring to mind an image of a person or a thought of a situation that you know, I am really in a defensive state about this individual, about this situation. And what I want you to do for about 30 seconds, this is why I invite you to turn your camera off, is I want you to come into the bodily position that best expresses just how defended you feel. So I want you to, if you had to express in the shape of your body how this defensiveness feels for you, I want you to do that right now. I'm going to time, and I want you to hold that just for 30 seconds. And if your camera is on and you just want to even just feel this in the fists, go ahead and do that. But just 30 seconds of holding the tightness and the contraction of this defensiveness. As we're coming close to the end of the 30 seconds, maybe just getting a little bit tighter, a little bit tighter, a little bit tighter. How defended are you? How defended are you? Holding, holding, holding. And now let it go. Let it go. And now if you're in a seated position, I want you to bring the feet onto the floor, hip width apart. And I want you to straighten up through your spine so that your spine feels very tall. I would like for you to rest your hands on your thighs. And I want you to bring your shoulders down and bring them back. So the feet are hip width apart, pressed against the floor. The spine is nice and tall, and the shoulders are down and back. And I want you to take 3 very deep breaths with me. Take a deep inhalation. And exhale. And again, a deep inhalation in, really, really big. And exhale. Inhale. And exhale. And I want you to bring that same issue back to mind, that same issue, that same person back to mind. And I just want you to notice if you feel it differently in this body that is now open, undefended. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. And I would just love to hear from you about that. Anyone?
Well, I'm Catherine. And,
Hi, Catherine.
I am in recovery. I got to say that somebody told me about this. I've been coming off and on to this, but someone told me about it last week, and I was like, oh boy, I need that. I was raised in an alcoholic home, so every one of these 4 things I have within me. I've been married 3 times, and I can tell you that most of my marriages had 1 or 2 of these involved in it, the failure of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that John Gottman's about marriage. It's usually about, but it's also relationship building. So I look at it that way. The person that I brought up, I recently just got out of a relationship with this person. It was a friend, but what I found is that she used me for a couple of years, and wasn't aware that I couldn't see it. You know what I'm saying? I didn't understand it. I didn't know it, so I allowed it. That's the word. I allowed it, and I was thinking that when I did that exercise just now, what I felt when I released everything, when I released the breaths after the breaths and after the defensive mode, I felt like I gave up. I surrendered. I'm done. I'm done with this. I think I went to a place of forgiveness. Do you know what I mean? It's like, this is just too much to carry, too much to feel about. I don't want to feel about this anymore. I just want to go away from it. And it's not a matter of like burying it. It's a matter of just like, okay, it's time to move on. You've held this onto this long enough. It's not doing you any good. It's only me. It's only hurting me and anybody else. And just allowing it to go. So I felt like it was a surrender. I felt it was good. It was a good feeling.
What you just said brings up so much for me, and the value of, I had really no intention of doing this exercise today. It just came to me as I was thinking about defensiveness. When you can take the shape in your own body of how that has felt for you, the holding on of it, and hold it for 30 seconds to a minute. That's all it takes. And we're actually exaggerating the defensiveness that we feel in bringing our bodies into the shape. And then when I take you into the position of grounding through your feet, getting a little taller in your spine, but most of all, dropping the shoulders and bringing it back, and then bringing back in the thought of the person or the situation that had you so contracted. Some people experience exactly what you experienced, Catherine, which is I have to let that go. Some people will have an insight about the person and the situation that they hadn't had before, because there's something about the moment of just opening up to it that frees us into sometimes a different way of thinking about the situation, a different way of feeling about the situation, and it can be very quick. I've done this before, and sometimes when I've done this, I've had people who came into the exercise with a very, very serious issue. Very serious, very painful, very defended about it. And when they came into that opening stance, would start laughing. That there was something about it that seemed incredibly humorous. So lots of things can happen or nothing can happen. But I just wanted to plant the seed of this really powerful way that the body's always with us. It's experiencing these things. We're holding these things in our very tissues, in our organs, in our glands. So what if we just, even periodically throughout the day, maybe just 3 times per day, just stopping whatever you're doing and just bringing the feet into that position, hip width apart, getting a little taller in the spine, and dropping the shoulders down and bringing them back. You don't even have to have an issue that you're working on, but just checking in with the way in which your posture might be supporting tension and defensiveness, or is your posture supporting peace and connection? It doesn't mean that you have to like what's going on. But can you bring yourself into a posture that's just more supportive to your well-being. Someone else? I'm curious about what that was like.
I'm Alyssa. I'll share.
Hi, Melissa.
Um, I was surprised by a couple things. The first thing I was surprised about was that you sort of almost like knew how I was positioned, even though you couldn't see me. But that's how I was. Like I had my fist balled up. I was really like tight, and you were kind of like, oh well, like I was surprised that you knew exactly how I was positioned. And then when you said, okay, relax, get into the other position, the person that I was focusing on was my ex-husband in a specific situation. And I've thought about this situation so many times. So there was no new realizations that could come to me. But when I was open and I pictured this situation again, I just felt a lot more compassion, like so much more compassion for him than I've ever, like, especially just to even have it in the situation I was thinking of is just, I don't, kind of crazy. So, and I've gained a lot of compassion for him over the last 2 years. So it's the only thing that makes me sad about it is it's too late. It just makes me sad. But I know now that I can kind of like have compassion for him and just let it go and heal and move on. But thank you. I really, really like that exercise. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope that you'll continue to use it. Remember, it's never too late. And what I mean by that is the healing in you, and in healing, one of the sort of the symbolic representations of healing is a capacity for compassion, especially towards someone that maybe has really hurt you or has behaved in reprehensible ways. When we can get to that place of, I can see you through the eyes and feel you through the heart of compassion, it's not just a healing for us, it's also a healing for that person. You don't even have to speak to that person. There is something that is energetically felt by that individual, no matter where they are, that your softening toward him heals. And it heals everyone around you. I think it's important to know that in that exercise, if it was a sense of compassion that you came to feel in part 2 of the exercise, there's a reason for that. And I think I mentioned this several sessions ago, that when we bring the shoulders down and when we pull them back and we really open up physically, we're opening up the chest, we're opening up the lungs, we're opening up the region of our physical heart. So we also know that this is the location where we can generate, simply by dropping the shoulders and bringing them back, we can generate by ourselves, just in the gesture and the posture of doing that, we can generate the production of that hormone, oxytocin. And oxytocin is the bonding hormone. It puts us into a position, it primes us. It primes us into an ability to be close. And this isn't to say that, you're going to get off the call today and call your ex-husband and bond with him again. But it puts you in a position biochemically, neurologically, to still continue to care about that person, that connection. This is one of the reasons why, and I think I may have talked about this in previous sessions, embracing is so important, because when we're in a very authentic hug or embrace, and our bodies are chest to chest. Part of the reason that it feels so good is because the oxytocin then is flowing between two people. Oxytocin is absolutely essential for the bonding of caregiver and child at the beginning of our life. It's as essential as oxygen. We will not develop in the ways that we need to develop physically and emotionally if we don't have that experience. And you all know individuals who have lived through experiences where that kind of bonding wasn't there, and the sort of difficulty and the challenges that they face moving forward in socially connecting with others. So there's lots of different things going on in that very, very simple change of our posture. And one of them, shoulders down and back, we start to generate the oxytocin. So I can be thinking about someone that maybe I haven't even talked to in a year or two, that I'm still very defensive about, very contracted around, and shoulders down and back. And I might be able to begin to generate a softening about that, not for that person, but first of all for me. Because that kind of defensiveness, again, I cannot emphasize enough how damaging it is to our own physical heart, to our capacity to breathe, all of that organ and glandular functioning. So that's where the compassion comes from. So I'm glad that you shared so that you could bring that piece forward for us. Someone else?
Christine, it's Helen. I was connecting on so many different levels with it, but one thing that was really evident was I was in a meeting the other day and I was talking about, like, one thing that happens to me is that I completely forget to breathe. I forget to breathe. It's one of the first things to go. And what happened to me today is that during that exercise is that it was very easy for me to get into that defensive posture. I was thinking of a specific incident, and it was a childhood incident. And I realized, and it came flooding like crazy through all of my relationships, that was present. Even though physically I may not have shown it, that defensiveness is there, and it's separating. And, I've done a lot of work around healing all of that, but I was, an awareness that happened to me today is that my protection instinct, like to protect my heart, my soul from pain, and specifically today, it was about the pain of loss because of the disease of alcoholism, grieving, like deep grieving, is that I get in a defensive posture and I don't even know I'm in it, because I'm not allowing closeness. There's something that's keeping, I don't ever want to go through anything again. You know what I mean? So it was just a really wild ride then, because it wasn't about an individual. It was totally about me. I remembered forgetting breathing. I felt my body in the defensive posture. As soon as I released it, that's when the floodgates opened this is about protecting your own heart here in a whole different way, which has been keeping people away from you with intention. Like, it's my way of keeping you away, which is not a good way to go through life. I would like to be a little more open, and I feel like this helped me today. Thank you.
So this is great. These responses are great. A couple of things. You said it was very easy for me to go into the defensive posture. Wow. And for a lot of us that have sort of been living this way most of our lives, very easy. It feels natural.
It does.
To come into that openness.
Yeah.
Sometimes that takes people's breath away. It's
Yeah.
like, whoa, wait a minute here. I can't do this. Thank God it's only for 30 seconds. I cannot do this. So in Chinese medicine, I don't know if you know this or not, but the lungs are the organ or the part of the body that are most affected by grieving.
Hmm.
So that when we have this realization that, wow, there are periods of time where I am actually not breathing, literally, like not
Yeah.
breathing,
Yes.
forgetting to breathe. The first place, when I hear that, the first place I would go is there grieving there?
Right.
It's certainly there is, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot. And so I don't want to feel that. I don't want to go there. I'm not going to breathe. Because what if I opened to that? What would happen? Would I drown in it? Would it kill me? Like, what would happen if I opened to that? I read recently that there's something now called screen apnea, where we spend so much time, on our devices that many of us, especially at work, as we're going through emails, we cease breathing for periods of time, much like someone who has sleep apnea doesn't breathe for periods of time. But I believe that this is true, not just of being in front of a screen, but I believe that it's true for so many of us emotionally, that it really helps when you have this awareness now that there are times when you're literally not breathing. And with the awareness, you're going to notice it more. I'm not breathing. So important to have that awareness and then to begin to start to remedy it. When we move from let's hold the tension into let's open it up, and I ended it with let's take 3 deep breaths. One of the things you might notice is that it almost feels like I have to gasp in order to get a good inhalation. That there's this place in my body where I'm stuck. It's like breathing through a brick wall. So as often as possible, I used to think that one of the remedies for this would be if I just could tie my hands behind my back periodically throughout the day, or just hold my hands behind my back and force an opening and force myself to take as many deep breaths as I need to break through, to start breaking through this, whatever it is you want to call it. For me, it feels like steel, a steel block, and to breathe through that. Because really, the truth of the matter is that an inhalation, a normal, very functional, healthy inhalation lands and goes as deep as right below the navel. Watch a dog or a cat or a baby in a very relaxed state breathing, and you will see this very big expansion of the belly, and then this fall and this rise and fall. We are meant to breathe in the same way, and we don't. And those of us who have had trauma or have lived for a long time in defense find it difficult to bring the breath past here. Like it feels like it's right here and up. as opposed to dropping all the way down. Another good exercise to do is to take a very light notebook or a little, just a little novel, lightweight novel, lay down and place it either right over the navel or slightly below, and breathe in such a way that you get it moving, that you just start to feel it moving, even if it's just for a couple of minutes a day. When I started to do that practice, and I still do it from time to time, I could only do it for just like very short period of time, because it felt very scary. I was very surprised by how scary it felt, which told me a lot about my own defensive posture. But you can try that.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I want to tell you, does anyone know why I said bring the feet hip width apart, let them rest on the floor, but I'm not recommending any kind of crossing, because crossing, even if it's at the feet or ankles, crossing can be a manifestation of the tension. What's really interesting is when you see people, and I've done this, who are crossing at the knees and at the ankles. Yeah, that's heavy defensiveness. But what do you imagine the reasoning is behind the feet uncrossed, hip width apart?
Grounding.
Grounding. Mm-hmm. Anything else? It's grounding, it's stability, it's strength. I am going to create a foundation for myself. No one else is doing it for me. I'm creating a foundation for myself physically through my own feet. And do that enough. And then you really start to feel like no matter what's going on, I can stand on my own 2 feet. I think that's why we have this phrase, right? I can stand on my own 2 feet. And I'm not bullshitting about it. I can, because I felt it in my body first. And then the mind follows, the emotion follows. What about, right? Because the defensive stance is kind of a curved spine. Why do we straighten up through the spine?
To become open.
It definitely sets us up. It sets us up to become open, because I have what behind me? I have my own dignity. I have my own support. I have my own back. We use that phrase, like, who has your back? We all have people in our life that we can say, yeah, that person has my back. It's very different though when you can say, yeah, I have a lot of people in my life that I know have my back, but I have my back all the time. So I have my strength through the feet. I have my back. And there's this sense of dignity that occurs when we straighten up through our spine. And it's not in any sort of arrogant way. It's a pride. I heard one person describe it as sovereignty. I have a sense of sovereignty about my life, and that I'm sovereign over it. And I think that's a really beautiful term to describe it. So there's both a strength and an ease and a grace about being dignified in the spine. So those three things are postural changes that create a cascade of hormonal and chemical shifts in the body and in the brain that prepare us to move very, very safely out of reactivity, out of defensiveness. So going back to, we have criticism, we have defensiveness. The antidote to defensiveness is openness. And no matter how hard it gets, I'm going to remain committed to our connection. I'm not going to shut down. I'm not going to run away again, unless it is to my detriment to stay connected to you. There are some relationships that we must leave. Okay. What is the antidote to contempt? Appreciation is a good antidote to contempt, but by the time you get to contempt, it's very, very difficult. You almost have to fake it till you make it with appreciation to move out of contempt. So what I like to say about contempt is be uncompromising about it, meaning it doesn't belong in any of my relationships. Feeling contemptuous and being treated in a contemptuous manner, I'm not, it's not acceptable. It's not something I will tolerate, and I am uncompromising about that. It is the most damaging of the four horsemen. And I think I may have mentioned this last time, but when contempt has arrived, and it stays and it becomes chronic, it is almost impossible to heal the relationship without some sort of third-party intervention. Two people might be able to heal that, or two leaders of a family might be able to correct contempt, but they would have to really know a lot about it, know what to do about it, have a pretty high degree of emotional intelligence in order to navigate that. But in my own experience and even with working with other people, contempt needs a therapeutic intervention or a coaching intervention. That's sort of when the writing's on the wall. We are in very, very big trouble here. And this relationship is either going to end or to be saved, lots of intervention, or the third option, which many of us forget or never entertain, and that is, can we build something entirely different that is based on entirely different pillars? Okay. And then stonewalling. If you have a very natural inclination to defend, you will have a pretty natural inclination to stonewall. Like you could probably already do it very well. And if that's the case, and you want to begin or sustain relationships that are really important to you, a good policy is to let this other person know, I tend to stonewall. And I want you to know that I care enough about this relationship that I'm not going to leave. Because stonewalling is a form of leaving. You might be physically in the relationship, but if you're stonewalled, you've left. You're somewhere else. You're behind a barrier. You're in a fortress, and the person is out there. The other person's out there. So a very good preventative to stonewalling, if you know that it's your tendency, is to set up an agreement. No one leaves. No one leaves. Worst case scenario, is two people who have stonewalled from each other and continue to live together or continue to run a family together or continue to, you know, fake their way through family parties and dinners and, you know, gatherings. No one knows or no one can really see it, but they have stonewalled against each other. Stonewalling is detrimental because, again, over time, it's a hardening of us. You know, think about what the heart might look like stonewalled physically. Like if your heart became a stone, the heart is this vital, vibrant, there's a softness to the human heart, both in its physical manifestation and in its emotional manifestation. Imagine it hardened. Imagine what happens to the heart when you've got hardened arteries, or there's a chamber of the heart. Right? So there are very, very real physical implications for stonewalling. So I'm going to end there. 4 horsemen: criticism, defense, contempt, stonewalling. And today we focused on their antidotes. And in the middle of today's session, that exercise. I really encourage you to practice that, maybe every day for just a minute or two. Pick something that really has you feeling contracted and defended. Hold that in your bodies for 30 seconds to a minute. Let it go by centering through your spine, grounding through your feet. Shoulders come down and back. And then hold that. 45 seconds to 2 minutes is all you need to create those neurological shifts. And just notice, wow, does this shift in my posture have me think about this differently? Feel about this differently? Maybe some new insights will come in, and maybe none of that will happen. But it's worth playing with that exercise. The church bells are ringing. So I will say goodbye. I'll see you next week. Have a great week. Continue to think about these things. Again, practice that exercise and go on to have a great day.